So where are they now? All of those big crowdfunding projects from the past couple years, how are they doing? Have they held up? Now, I love looking back and talking about stuff. So the biggest names, the biggest projects, the most amount of money, how do you feel now? Where is the standing of everything at? Do you regret not backing it? Or do you regret backing it? Let's talk. Now, full disclaimer, again, I haven't played all these games. I can only go off of reputation with some of these games. And frankly speaking, I actually prefer that sometimes in this channel. I'm not one of those people that can say, I have played every single game so I can give you an opinion on things. I have way too many games in the first place. And so sometimes it's just fun to be able to talk about, what I see, what I hear on my side of things as both the person behind the camera wearing this hat, but also the person as a consumer like you guys and saying, well, what am I hearing? What's the perception in the hobby? Where are things at? So 2024, let's start hot and heavy with 2024 because these are the ones that are most recently in your mind. Let's start with the biggest daddy of them all, Awakened Realms and Lands of Evershade. The hybrid RPG board game experience, 1 to 5 players, D&D for people that can't play D&D. Now, as someone who's getting back into this side of things, now I'm actually regretting potentially not backing this. I still have some reservations, though, because I look at this and I go, what is this truly endgame going to be like? I think the ceiling for this one is incredibly high. I think the basement is also actually incredibly high. But I think it's a situation of, is this what you want out of this as well? I worry, just like many other campaign-driven, scenario-based games, of the variety that is going to be included. I worry about many of the Awakened Realms games of the overhead in the labor that is in terms of learning this, incorporating it, remembering it, and the time frame in which it's going to be able to get to the table from an easier standpoint. I am not as big a fan on the consumerism-driven market of you need all of the expansions from the get-go as an all-in because otherwise it's not going to be a complete experience, but that is ubiquitous across crowdfunding nowadays. Anyway, this thing raised nearly $12.7 million campaign-wise. Now, the caveat with that is, and I'm not sure if this is a preferential thing or it's choose your how you want it represented on the GameFound page, but there's always this how much we raised, but then if you click on the actual campaign, then it links you to the actual raised during the campaign. But $5 million post-campaign? So a lot of people actually taking my advice and saying, wait for things, and then you can always up your pledge later or late back, rather than pledge during the campaign, because there are very, 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 very few campaigns, as this is illustrated, that you actually need to back during the campaign. And wouldn't you rather be sure, not a semi-sure thing, but a sure I love this, by waiting for the rulebook to come out? And the biggest problem I have in that regard has been Awakened Realms' MO is they don't need to show backers, consumers, a rulebook. I see this across the board. They are the exception rather than the rule. People are giving them a pass all the time because I see people saying, I need full gameplay. I need a rule book. What I have to say, though, is the rule book in this sense was literally about 10 months to the date available after the campaign closed. So in case you didn't want to pledge, in case you weren't sure, it really allows you to wait this long. And that's fantastic because now it just confirms the fact that you don't actually need to pledge during the campaign. 42 pages of rulebook. You're also always worried that if you get this rulebook, you read this and it's finding that it's maybe not a good fit for you, or you wait and you see, as with any of these games, truth be told, that it's maybe not a right group dynamic, or all of a sudden you've got something else that takes the place of it and you don't need those anymore. Are you still going to get all your money back, or did you just put a pledge down to lose 10% on a I should have waited 6 to 12 months anyway after the campaign, but I couldn't help myself hotness cycle in that aspect of things? not nearly as long as I was worried about, to be frank with you, with a lot of the other Awakened Realms and how complex this is. But that also does not discount the fact that the handbook, right, because this is modeling itself in the tabletop role-playing game side of things, you know, giving you the character classes and the abilities, and, you know, those are all separate. You have to incorporate those into the actual rules of the game. And yeah, if you're like me and you like skimming through the lore and reading about this stuff and seeing the cool graphics, that's awesome. Would you go out and buy a D&D handbook or the Pathfinder handbook in order to understand how to play the game fully in those ways? Because not only is, you know, tabletop role-playing fun, but it's fun of knowing what other things and other people can do and trying to maximize and synergize in those ways and in fun ways and all of your options. And the rule book being 42 pages then is deceptively small if you're having to account for some, at least, of this handbook, by any means not all of it either. And so they gave people nearly 2 months to digest this, which was a decent amount, but also not a whole lot of incentive as the reason to get it during the campaign. And since that campaign pledge manager closing at the end of October, I mean, we haven't had any updates. So this thing, I think, is not going to be here until 2027, which again begs you pledged it in 2024 and are getting something 3 years later. How does that make you feel? Then we have to go back to Avalon, the Riven Veil. This was Shadowborn Games, right? The follow-up to Oathsworn. How do you follow up to a game whose heights are Oathsworn, right? I think that's partially the reason why we haven't seen any Kingdom Death Monster, anything new, right? Because the expectation of any game that isn't additional content from something like that with your previous one is just never going to be met by the people that loved it in the first place, which is why sometimes you either just offer more of the same or you stay the hell away from it in the first place, which is kind of what Avalon the Riven Veil did, is they said, okay, we are not going back to that right now. We're going to go adjacent and something completely differently mechanically as an area control asymmetric faction style of things. I had the hands-on prototype to be able to talk about. It raised $1 million, which is still awesome, especially for area control in this manner in the first place, because it gives more root vibes than anything else, which also begs the question, if the best part about this game was the asymmetry with the repeated meta play style, which it arguably, well, unarguably was, how does that fit your group? Or are you better off with something that you can play once and then play 6 months from now, because the dynamics of the gameplay, like in El Grande, are still going to be there regardless of how well you can remember the rules in the meantime. They have been very good with their latest updates to keep backers in the loop of what's going on with the tax tariffs and everything else, and they basically said they're going to start immediately manufacturing, and it's going to be done by the end of the month, get the game out before Chinese New Year, and everyone's going to have it in Q2. So then, if you're looking for things like as a non-US backer, well, you're fine. If you're a US backer, 5 to 6% cost increase based on your pledge level. And then comes the waiting part to see if this is going to end up a year from now on everybody's top 10 lists at the end of 2026. The other interesting one to go along with that as a second game was World Order from Hegemonic Games. Very different, but again, shades of Hegemony in the first place. International relations, asymmetric world powers, and just dynamics in terms of utilizing some of the area control mixed with a war politicized game in the first place. Over $1 million, which was incredibly impressive. The pledge manager actually closes right after I finish filming this. You're looking at over a year with this one as well, between pledges and pledges. Final rulebooks are done at this point, and it's in the manufacturer's hands, so probably a late Q2 with this one as well, for expectations to probably not exceed their original, because again, pedigree's so good, but that's what we're left wondering, right? And again, I don't say that as a bad thing, because what was the follow-up to Gloomhaven? Remember that one? Okay. That doesn't mean that great games can't have ones that aren't as good. It just means hold your expectations for what they need to be with all of these in check. Then we hop over to Mind Clash with the Revenant, right? The Voidfall Light? No, sort of. More of a medium weight worker placement, now standalone in the same universe. And I think it got a lot of people, but it also raised the questions like in the lines of your Terra Mysticas and your Gaia projects of the what happens when you do Terra Nova, the lighter version of things. Are people going to be as enamored with it? Are they going to love it as much? And that's where it gets tricky to tell. I mean, it didn't clearly get anywhere near the level of funding, but $700,000+ is fantastic. Pledge Manager closed at the beginning of November, and they are in the process of going through the pre-production copy right now to get the manufacturing rolling, which probably by the time you guys are viewing this, and they might already be doing, which again puts us very similar Q2 trajectory for this Mindclashian game. Then we go back a couple projects for Dregori, who did a pirate-themed version of Tanares in a more self-contained crawl experience in the Tanares Expeditions Central Sea version of things. Still, again, $750,000 almost, and they're beautiful miniatures to go along with it. Not to sound like a broken record, but the Pledge Manager closed at the end of November, and see previous comments on other games about waiting. But they've got pretty much all the miniatures done, and they're getting the quality sent back and forth, and they want to ship the games potentially by mid-December. So I'm not sure if that's still realistic at this point, because this, was at the end of October, and there's been no update in the last month since the last update at the time of me filming this. So again, I'd make the argument that if you haven't already begun shipping, we're probably almost out of that range of Q1 of 2026, but we'll see. Then the biggest unknown of them all, and this was very controversial because there was a lot of trust me, I know, bro. Trust me, bro. I think that this is going to be good, in the form of Shin Megami Tensei, the board game, with huge demonic miniatures as the main emphasis, with very limited actual communication with the publisher who was running the campaign in the first place, which left a lot of people feeling very uncomfortable, or that this was a scam. But truth be told, at this point, I mean, we're seeing regular updates every couple months, and it seems like all is go right now. Same time, the problem is the updates leave a lot to be desired in terms of what they're actually offering. And I want to show you what I mean by this, because, right, I have no problem with this, but all it says right here is, you know what? Yeah, like every other crowdfunding project, manufacturing and shipping aren't going to be in 2025. Well, in case that wasn't clear, with these big miniatures and using an IP brand, yeah, that's going to be unfortunate. But like, okay, where are things at? And then you go to the previous update and you get this huge amount of Japanese, and then gives you the English translation down here, differences between concepts and updated designs, more concept, more inspiration, but it doesn't really show you 7 in-work progress images. Like, where actually is that for being when this update was done right here, September 18th, almost a year out? That's very little to show. Now, I'm not going to say scam by any means, but you know what? Show me more, because this seems like not a lot of information to go off of to feel good or not yet at this point. Which brings us to the last one of 2024. I know, right? These were some big projects, so we have to talk about them. Open Owl Studios and their Storyfold Wildwoods, which has about 130 ratings at the time of me filming this. So pretty, so moody, as a solo-only experience of card-based manipulation. Rules being simple, quite random, and mitigation of rolls. There's reviews out already. Dice Tower gave it 8 and 9s if it's your vibes. So it's a easy play game mechanic of managing creatures in a river. Does that sound like fun to you? Well, so far, all ratings are relatively positive, but it's also one of those where, who knows? If it's not for you, it's not for you, and it's a solo player's solo lover dream, but well, give it a look, even if you're not one of those people, I guess. So where does that leave us with the rest of the projects? Well, interestingly enough, 2023 is actually kind of okay. Nemesis Retaliation, the third one. I have a copy. I will try and have a review out before the end of the year. I'm crossing my fingers. That and Grim Coven are going to go head-to-head. Again, it raises a really interesting question of who got Nemesis, but also how does it compare? Because it is by far and away right now the smallest sample size of them, overarchingly, though, it has the best rating. So when you go for this style of things, it reminds me very highly of other popular games in this line, like sort of a Spirit Island, if you will, where who's going to get Jagged Earth? Who is going to get the Nature Incarnate expansion? Now, those are expansions. Now, maybe it's more like a Marvel United, where you've got this subsequent iteration, and it's a good starting point, but a good portion of the people that are going to be invested are the ones that loved 1 or 2. You'll still have the newcomers, but by the winnowing down of the specificity later on with this project as the third time around, inevitably the comparisons also rain hot and heavy. So it is doing really well, 8.8. It's actually in the Board Game Geek top 1000 already, 120th thematic. So I can't discount that whatsoever. And then subsequently, the next one up, Kelp, Shark vs. Octopus, the 2-player head-to-head, slightly asymmetric, very light style game, is just outside the top 1000, 233rd thematic. So again, what they are is relatively fantastic, and they're relatively successful, especially when you can manage to snag a couple of Board Game Geek nominations in the form of Kelp. But then we dive into the whale of an expansion in the form of Ahoy, which came as the New Horizons on BackerKit. I didn't remember this came on BackerKit whatsoever, because on Board Game Geek, it's separated out into expansions. And I guess that's fine. It's just weird, because it threw me for a loop trying to find it in the first place. The Fang and Fortune and the Rivals and Renegade. Ahoy is rather the completely under-the-radar asymmetric game from Leader. And I don't say that as a bad thing. This game, even though the rating is only 7.3, still rates in the top 1350 on Board Game Geek, which is pretty impressive. The biggest concern I had is just, initially when it came out, the subbing of the original 2 factions that were not necessarily necessary in their other asymmetric game route, where you can just pick any 4 and go, right? And I think the expansions offered a little bit of variety on that, but it's an easier to get to play. It's an easier to understand. It's an easier to teach version. But I think that's where it both gained people, but lost people that said, well, I don't want a lighter version of Terra Mystica. I don't want a lighter version of Root. So you're not getting the overlap there. And then inevitably when you had people that were like, I really like Root, like me Ahoy. Oh, it's not the same as Root. Peace out. See you later. So for what it was, for what it is, I give it a lot of kudos and credit. The only thing I'll say with this is that the incentive to back some of these on crowdfunding is getting lower and lower as we're seeing more stores, online stores, pick up crowdfunding pledges that are not named the Game Steward. Because, I found this while Googling it. Board Game Bliss offered a package. Game Nerds has offered packages previously and ongoing as well with some of these pledge bundles. And it was the exact same cost as the backer kit. And it was probably, as we often talk about, you can get it with free shipping if you reach the threshold. So then the incentive to back it on crowdfunding, again, not saying leader style things, but just as a leader offers you a better price because that's what they're known for on crowdfunding, they're kind of getting undercut by the stores who are pledging and passing it on. I don't want to say it's straight cost because I'm not sure if all of these have retailer pledges as well, but it's an interesting, how is that going to change crowdfunding? Or are publishers going to start not allowing to necessarily do that? Then we have to talk about Food Chain Magnate, the special edition from Lucky Duck, which is in the process of hitting the shores as we speak at the time of me filming this, with nearly 5,500 backers and well over $2 million to blingify and slightly plastify, as well as, well, I guess, aesthetify a game that questionably needed it in the first place. Although definitely not my type of bling when I looked at this. Although post-campaign, there were definitely, at least even during campaign, some upgrades in terms of some of that. And I guess it raises the Foundations of Rome question of, if it's prettier, will it hit the table more? Or is that just going to lead to increased setup and teardown when you've got these huge plastic chunks? Same question that Arc Nova, the 3D edition, raised earlier this year on crowdfunding. I don't really want to talk about it from a game rank standpoint. The gameplay is exactly the freaking same. The only thing that I'm really going to highlight here is this was a freaking metric ton of money to get the collector's pledge with all of this. That was going to cost you over 300 euros. Last up, Bullet Cubed with the new expansions and storage big coffin box. I'm joking, but I love Bullet. Bullet is amazing. Bullet is one of my favorite games. And somehow, I don't even know how this happened. It raised over $600,000. I didn't even remember that it did because it also offered some new expansion content. If you need a storage boxes I think should only be sold on crowdfunding in the first place. And I think this is a prime example of hopefully one that is designed to ease of access. And it's actually storing things because there are something like 5 or 6 now separate games that you can get for Bullet. Is it going to be as user-friendly as I may want, though? Because as we see with many, many inserts in general, let alone storage boxes, they're better for storage, which is fine, but I want able to get out and to the table fast, which is what the great thing of Dice Throne, as much as I feel like that is overdone in some other ways, the self-contained nature of some of that, the ability to store them separately, tear them down and put them back out is incredibly accessible, more so than almost anything. So I'm hoping that gives almost this sort of vibe. Then we go all the way back in the way machine to 2022, and we only have a couple to talk about, but 2 of these were on a lot of lists for the best games of the year in 2024. So let's talk about this really quickly. Slay the Spire. This is now risen up to the 27th best game of all time. Very few detractors, very much love, and arguably now, the best IP easily from a video game, one of the best IP games, period, that isn't named Dune almost. So that is freaking impressive, especially when you're able to mimic what people loved about the video game in the first place, but make it stand well enough alone, because that was my big criticism when it ran, is I said, I don't know if you can do this. I don't know if you can do that. I don't know if you can make it cooperative. I don't know if you can balance all this. They did it. Boom. Mea culpa. Contention Games. And we're going to see more content soon, because they have announced an expansion for this sometime, maybe in 2026, in the form of Downfall. No deets available, though. Just more stuff in general. And you don't need the sleeves. You can get them, though. You can get them. Second up, Unconscious Mind. As many people's one of the best Euro or worker placement games of 2024. 7.9. Sitting in the top 342 board games at the time of me filming this, with nearly 5,600 ratings. It's Freudian worker placement with multi-aspects of areas trying to manipulate, control, and manage. One of the heaviest games on this video at a 4 weight rating, but still accessible enough for yours truly not to be completely and utterly overwhelmed. So again, don't confuse the fact that I can play it with that I can play it well. Those are 2 completely different things, but I like it for what it is. But at the same time, as someone who is not a purveyor of these quite regularly, it still is borderline keep in my collection, sell as well, with the cascading effects, the rondels, and the engine building that goes along with it, as clever as it has been so far. Then last up, and I was not personally as big a fan of this one, but each to their own, in the tile laying sort of, I don't want to say deductive process, but a little bit of that trying to manage numbers as you're building these tiles in a real-time-esque vibe with some slight asymmetry in the form of fit to print from Flat Out Games. I like a lot of the other Flat Out games better, but that's okay because this one's still sitting just outside the top 1,000. Is relatively impressive for what it is and staying the test of time in that way, because this one actually came out in 2023 as well. You know what? Before I looked this up, I would have thought this is one that was a lot higher, but I think it's the Venn diagram of the niche within a niche situation of just also crowdfunding expense in the form of Heroes of Might and Magic 3, because although its ranking does not necessarily bring it as high as you might think based off of the funding that it got on crowdfunding, this thing has been one of the hottest properties on crowdfunding in the last 2-3 years, with their first and second campaign, millions and millions of dollars, as another, well, relatively well-received port from the original video game. A little bit heavier from Archon, a little bit more complex than some of the other strategy-esque based games with these elements. But as much as I can't probably tell you on the surface what makes it stand out in those ways, people have really thought well of it so far. And so, don't really have anything to say, but if some is good, well, you'll probably see more in the future. And going back to the Wayback Machine in 2021, we're talking all the way back to Hegemony from Hegemonic Games. 42nd game overall. Heavy, asymmetry, and people just absolutely love it. So it's going to be really interesting to see when World Order comes out from them, where that and how that makes people feel. Simulating the whole contemporary nation in an asymmetric political as well as economic game between the classes and the state warfare, in that sense of the, well, state, capitalists, middle class, and the working class. Dynamic of keeping people in check, and one of the best heavy games, not even arguably, of the last 4 or 5 years. And similarly, I remember doing this video last year because I was so surprised that Mindbug is so well thought of, and it's not just my love for it, but as the 410th best game overall at the time of me filming this 2-player head-to-head steal your opponent's overpowered character creature cards and rinse and repeat until you knock the opponent out of 3 health, just overachieves in every way. So Nerd Lab, you know, I'm a little bit of a simp for them, and I love most of the stuff they put out. This is no exception. I just covered recently as well the Mindbug King of Tokyo crossover, and they just seem to be continuing to knock it out of the park. The blessing curse of it is you can pick up any set and play with any set. Right? So get one that you like and just see if you want the rest of them, mix and match. It's just a shame you can't use more of them at the same time, but that's part of the beauty, is when everything's overpowered, nothing is overpowered. Weather Machine. This is an interesting twist of the Lacerda side of things, as the heaviest game in this whole video at a 4.56, sitting at the 693rd game of all time, and it's sort of the outlier in some of the other heavy Lacerdas. Again, like, I see very little bad about it, but it's always intriguing to me to see how people view these and how I see that from the outside, because this is way too complex for me to get a good understanding of and to really be able to analyze what's the difference between this one and Kanban or any of the other, you know, of the same variety, or even comparatively to its more contemporary compatriots like a Galactic Cruise. But I just think it's fascinating to see how these things go, because again, it's one of those situations where sometimes the groundswell of the hype and hotness doesn't always reflect the ranking, which is, again, just something I love to see, because it becomes so unpredictable about where things lie, and why this is some people's favorite, and why this is also some people's least favorite in this line. And I can just never tell when it comes to crowdfunding, so I just like to sit back and say, I wonder where that's going to end up. Then we talk Ostia from Uchiba Koya, who continues to churn out really, really well-supported games on crowdfunding. And this was the trade route-driven Mediterranean Mancala resource system that some people love, and some people find it to be predetermining of what's the best move every single time and don't like it from the same side of things. 8 rating, though, 1700s, is limited solely by, well, it's just not easily available on the secondary market or at a lot of stores outside of Uchiba Koya's, or on previous crowdfunding campaigns when they sometimes allow you to get their other product. Just another interesting twist, as easily the most successful crowdfunding, Eastern Hemisphere company, or at least out of the Asian market. So I love seeing what they've got, even though most of their games in the recent past have been a little bit too heavy for me overall. Last but not least, the Elder Scrolls, the other Elder Scrolls, the Elder Scrolls that came before the Elder Scrolls, in the form of Modiphis's Skyrim the Adventure game, which, weirdly enough, has actually, I feel like, grown on people. It's all the way up to 2300. Nah, just kidding. I actually just looked it up and it was pretty much the same. So it's remained relatively stagnant over the last 3 years. It hasn't changed hardly at all. It's risen up about 100 rankings in 3+ years' time, which not a bad thing. Again, if you have told me that I could make a top 2000 board game on Board Game Geek in my career, I think I'd be really happy with that. But as a Skyrim game, I don't know, especially when you've now got the betrayal of the Second Era in terms of the mechanical difference between one and the other. Which one offers you more of the experience that you're looking for if you are an Elder Scrolls fan in the first place? I think this is going to be more accessible. This has a little bit more of the vibe in some ways, but the chip theory might be more still for the gamer's gamer who is looking for more mechanical complexity and strategy overall. But I guess there's something for everybody, which is why it's fun looking back at this list and seeing where things are at. That's all I got. Stay classy. Thanks for watching. Peace out. See you around.